John Oliver's controversial take on Gaza crisis. What he got wrong. When a prominent late-night television personality tells a world leader to burn in eternal damnation on live television, you know the conversation has reached a boiling point that demands our attention. John Oliver, the sharp-tongued British-American comedian who's become increasingly vocal about Middle Eastern politics since the conflict began, recently delivered what many are calling his most inflammatory segment yet. During his HBO program Last Week Tonight, Oliver launched into an extended critique that has both supporters and detractors questioning the boundaries of political commentary in entertainment media. The comedian's central argument revolves around a deeply troubling accusation that Israel is deliberately withholding food and essential supplies from Gaza's population. Drawing from reports published by international human rights organizations including B'Tselem, as well as investigations featured in the Israeli publication Haaretz, Oliver painted a picture of systematic deprivation that he squarely blamed on Israeli leadership. But here's where it gets controversial, and where Oliver's critics say he crossed a line. Directly addressing Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu during his monologue, Oliver didn't mince words. He characterized the Prime Minister as an incompetent performer, comparing him to a magician who can't make his tricks work, before delivering the explosive phrase that has dominated headlines: "Go to hell." This wasn't just political criticism. It was personal, visceral, and designed to provoke. The comedian's ire didn't stop at Israeli leadership either. He turned his attention to American foreign policy, specifically targeting the United States. Financial support of Israel. Oliver highlighted the staggering $18 billion in military assistance provided during the conflict's initial year, framing this aid as direct complicity in what he described as a campaign to starve Gaza's population. When addressing Israel's humanitarian efforts, including airdrops of food and medical supplies, Oliver was dismissive. He characterized these efforts as woefully inadequate. A mere gesture that fails to address the scale of the crisis he believes Israel has deliberately created. And this is the part most people miss, the glaring omissions that have sparked intense debate. While Oliver extensively covered allegations that Hamas intercepts and redirects humanitarian aid intended for Palestinian civilians, his treatment of this crucial issue raised eyebrows. He acknowledged that 2 senior Israeli officials have made such claims but appeared to minimize the substantial evidence supporting these allegations. Critics argue this represents a significant blind spot in his analysis. Even more striking was Oliver's complete silence regarding the Israeli civilians currently held captive in Gaza. For many observers, this omission represents a fundamental flaw in his presentation. How can one discuss the humanitarian crisis without acknowledging all affected civilians, regardless of their nationality? Oliver concluded his segment with a forceful demand for increased international intervention to pressure Israel into ending what he characterized as an illegal blockade. The studio audience responded with enthusiastic applause, suggesting his message resonated with at least that particular crowd. However, the broader reaction has been far more divided. Supporters praise Oliver for using his platform to highlight what they see as urgent humanitarian concerns that mainstream media often underreports. They argue that his passionate delivery reflects the gravity of the situation and that strong language is sometimes necessary to cut through political rhetoric and diplomatic niceties. Detractors, on the other hand, point to what they consider serious gaps in his presentation. They question how someone can claim to provide comprehensive coverage of a humanitarian crisis while ignoring the suffering of hostages and minimizing documented evidence of aid diversion. Some critics go further, suggesting that Oliver's approach reflects a predetermined bias that undermines his credibility as a commentator. This brings us to a fundamental question that extends far beyond this single segment. In an era where entertainment and news increasingly overlap, what responsibility do comedian commentators have to present balanced perspectives? Should we expect the same journalistic standards from late-night television that we demand from traditional news sources? Moreover, Oliver's segment raises uncomfortable questions about how we discuss complex international conflicts. Is it possible to adequately address humanitarian concerns without acknowledging the suffering of all affected parties? Can passionate advocacy coexist with objective analysis? Or does emotional investment inevitably lead to selective presentation of facts? Perhaps most controversially of all, does Oliver's approach actually help or harm the cause he's trying to champion? While his supporters argue that strong language and clear moral positions are necessary to motivate action, critics contend that his one-sided presentation alienates potential allies and reinforces existing divisions rather than building bridges toward solutions. These are the questions that Oliver's latest segment forces us to confront. Questions that don't have easy answers, but demand our serious consideration. Whether you found his monologue compelling or concerning, it's impossible to deny that it has succeeded in sparking exactly the kind of difficult conversation that many would prefer to avoid. What's your take? Does Oliver's passionate advocacy justify his selective presentation of facts? Or do his omissions undermine his entire argument? More broadly, should entertainment figures who tackle serious political issues be held to journalistic standards? Or is their role fundamentally different? The comment section awaits your thoughts. And don't expect everyone to agree with you. John Oliver, the unexpected moral compass of America. How did John Oliver emerge as a guiding moral figure in the United States? Not long ago, a friend sent me a puzzling text message that piqued my curiosity. I thought of you after reading one of your recent articles. They wrote, "Thank you for articulating that. As a columnist, I frequently tackle a variety of topics. Some of my pieces delve into the complexities of women's health, while others address the dire humanitarian crisis unfolding in Gaza. Was my friend expressing gratitude for shedding light on the alarming trend of individuals on eBay willing to pay exorbitant prices for Gwyneth Paltrow's discontinued candle, humorously named, 'This smells like my vagina'? Or were they referring to the grave situation in Gaza? I lean towards the latter interpretation, but the ambiguity of the message was all too familiar, especially when discussing Gaza. The previous administration under Trump imposed severe restrictions on pro-Palestinian discourse, creating an environment where even private conversations can provoke fear of professional or immigration repercussions. Many politicians and media outlets seem to struggle with straightforward communication regarding Palestine. I've encountered lengthy articles lamenting the tragic circumstances of starving children that fail to mention Israel even once. The number of articles discussing starvation stalking Gaza that avoid addressing the root causes of this crisis is staggering. The situation in Gaza is catastrophic, with widespread destruction. A growing number of voices are now acknowledging that a genocide is occurring, especially after discussions in the Knesset about plans for the mass displacement of Palestinians to create a Gaza Riviera. Despite this, denial of the atrocities in Gaza remains rampant in the US, and the pervasive fear surrounding discussions about Palestine means that when a prominent figure openly criticizes Israel's actions, it still makes headlines. Take John Oliver, for instance. The host of Last Week Tonight recently made waves by delivering a candid analysis of the man-made famine in Gaza. He stated, "Look, Gaza is starving is a sentence that's objectively true, but it's also slightly misleading because it's too passive. Gaza is being starved by Israel." I appreciate Oliver's willingness to speak plainly about this issue. However, it is infuriating that a late-night television host is providing such clarity While editorial boards, news anchors and politicians often treat mass starvation as an unfortunate side effect of war rather than a calculated act. For example, a CBS report from last December was titled, "Hunger Spreads Virtually Everywhere in Gaza Amid Israel-Hamas War," which, as the Al Jazeera Journalism Review points out, reflects a trend among major US media outlets to frame the crisis as a food crisis, rather than acknowledging it as a deliberate blockade. Meanwhile, the right-leaning Free Press, which CBS is reportedly considering acquiring for up to $250 million, partly due to its pro-Israel stance, has characterized media coverage of starvation in Gaza as part of a highly effective campaign of information warfare orchestrated by Hamas. Despite experts warning about the risk of famine in Gaza since December 2023, a media analysis by the watchdog group FAIR reveals that most outlets only began to cover the situation when it became undeniably dire. The conditions of famine have been out in the open for well over a year, and yet it was considered barely newsworthy in US news media, the report states. John Oliver is not alone among late-night hosts in addressing these critical issues. From the chaotic events of the Trump administration to the ongoing crisis in Gaza, late-night comedians, along with figures like children's entertainer Miss Rachel, have seemingly taken on the role of the moral conscience of America. Jon Stewart, the former host of The Daily Show, has also been vocal about the situation in Gaza. In a recent episode, he expressed, "I have a moral clarity about what I'm seeing. I feel like a crazy person. I feel as if I'm watching something that is so self-evidently inhumane and horrific. And to be told that I have to shut up because I risk the Jewish state by speaking out? I would say the opposite. I think they're putting the likelihood of a surviving Jewish state much more at risk with this type of action." Stephen Colbert, on the other hand, has not frequently addressed Gaza, but he has criticized the suppression of student protests, asserting, "Even if you don't agree with the subject of their protests, as long as they are peaceful, students should be allowed to protest. It's their First Amendment right." He has been particularly outspoken regarding Trump, recently describing a large settlement paid to Trump by Paramount Global, the parent company of CBS, over content in a CBS show as a big fat bribe. Just days later, his show was cancelled, with many speculating that Paramount executives wanted to maintain a favorable relationship with Trump to facilitate a merger. Trump himself remarked, "I absolutely love that Colbert was fired. It's clear that late-night hosts are stepping up in ways that some other influential figures are not when it comes to holding power accountable." This situation is no laughing matter. When comedians become the most vocal advocates for truth, it raises serious questions about the state of our nation. Irwa Madawi is a columnist for The Guardian US. What are your thoughts on the issues discussed in this article? If you would like to share your perspective in a response of up to 300 words, please email us for consideration in our letters section.